opportunity to pass over to Tony and his colleagues. And thank you very much for coming along tonight.
Well, thanks for being invited. It's a rare honour. I think it's the first time I've ever been in an SNP meeting. I was a keen supporter of the referendum, and I always see myself as a bit of a nationalist, cultural nationalist. But I come from a socialist background. But like many of my comrades, we've, I think large parts of the left have actually come over to the idea of independence, and I remain committed to that idea. What I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to look at the brief was to actually look at the issue of sanctions from a national perspective, UK-wide and Scotland, and then what I want to do, talk about what sanctions are, what they actually mean to people, and then also to look at it more from a local perspective about the work that we've actually been doing in Dundee. And I've got even some case studies from today. We were outside the brew today, and unfortunately we are depressingly busy, and we're getting busier over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Up until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there seemed to be a dramatic falling off in the number of sanctions that we were actually experiencing. But in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there seems to be again an upturn. It might have something to do with the financial year, something like that, I'm not quite sure. But I want to start from a historical perspective. I don't want to talk about sanctions at all. What I want to talk about is the introduction of the new Poor Law in 1834. And this is just a short excerpt from a book called Empire, Industry and Class, which was a study of the impact of the British Empire on social relations within Dundee. In 1834, the same year that slaves were emancipated in the British colonies, the new Poor Law effectively introduced another form of slavery on British shores in the shape of the punitive incarceration of the poor through the provision of so-called indoor relief. Frederick Angus described these new Poor Law Bastilles as the most repulsive residence which the refined ingenuity of a Malthusian can invent. Paupers were handed over helpless and without redress to the caprice of the inspectors, and were forced to complete useless tasks such as stone breaking for males and oakum picking for females, in order that their labour would not compete with those of outside concerns. Those who did not finish their task got nothing to eat, and all inmates wore a workhouse uniform that marked out their wretched status. Families were broken up in order to prevent the superfluous from multiplying and demoralised parents from influencing their children. Now, if we come right back up to the present, to December 2014, this is the view of the new Poor Law from the pen of Frederick Angus in 1834. And this is the view of the sanctions regime by Dr. David Webster, who's the Honorary Senior Research Fellow for Urban Studies at the University of Glasgow, and he's writing in December 2014. And he's speaking about sanctions. Remember what sanctions are. Sanctions is the removal of all benefits from a benefit claimant or an unemployed person if they have actually not adhered to their job seekers agreement. And the sanctions can last from a minimum of 4 weeks up to a maximum of 3 years. And the way that it works is you start off with a 4-week sanction. In the first 2 weeks you receive nothing, absolutely nothing. You don't even receive hardship allowance. And thereafter what happens is if you have a second sanction, it goes up to 12 weeks. If you have a third sanction, it goes up to 26 weeks. If you have a fourth sanction, it goes up to 1 year, and you can actually end up with sanctions of 3 years. But this is what he says about sanctions. And remember, compare and contrast with what Engels' description of the new Poor Law was in 1834. Sanctions are not an evidence-based system designed to promote the employment, well-being and development of the labour force. This is a chaotic system based on ideology and characterised by cruelty, incompetence, inefficiency, malpractice and dishonesty, which is doing immense damage to the least privileged in our society and working against many other public and voluntary programmes aimed at addressing social ills. A combination of silo thinking by officials in the DWP and its predecessors and ideological gestures by politicians has led to the growth of what is a huge secret penal system, rivalling in its severity the mainstream judicial system, but without the latter's safeguards. And I think that's a very, very important point to make. Because my experience of the sanctions regime, and I've been campaigning now on the sanctions issues since last December, So what is that? It's like about 15 months or something. My view is this, is that the sanctions regime it does not rival the penal system in terms of severity. It's much, much worse. Because a prisoner that's committed, and if any kind of offence is actually sent to prison, will actually be fed, they'll be watered, they'll be suffering as a result of not having access to electricity or gas or heating. So fundamentally what we have is a fundamentally inhumane system that, in my view, not only surpasses the penal system, which is becoming increasingly punitive, but also surpasses the new poor law of 1834 in terms of its severity. I don't think we can, that is actually hyperbole. And when you see some of the case studies that us ourselves have actually come across just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I believe that you'll see where we're actually coming from with regards to this particular question. Now, David Webster, this is evidence that he was giving to the inquiry into benefit sanctions policy called Beyond the Oakley Review. And this was evidence presented to the House of Commons Work and Pensions Committee. And David is actually very confident that as a result of the work of the House of Commons Work and Pensions Select Committee, that the sanctions regime will actually end. But I'm not holding my breath. As I say, I think he's over-optimistic in some regards, but I hope he's right and I'm wrong. Now, when we're talking about sanctions, if we explain very briefly what sanctions actually is, it's the removal of benefits for offences committed under the Job Seekers Agreement. Everybody, when they start work on JSA, is actually given a Job Seekers Agreement. And you have to sign up to that Job Seekers Agreement before you actually receive any kind of payment. And the payment for a single person in Job Seekers Agreement at the moment is £72 a week, roughly, for a single person. And when you're sanctioned, some people who are vulnerable, although it's discretionary on the part of the DWP, can be granted a hardship allowance. So if you are actually under sanction, the most that you can actually expect to live on for the period of your sanction, if you're a single person, is £47 a week. They actually remove 40% of your benefits from the £72, and it works out around £47 a week. I'll come across one guy, I was in a meeting with him earlier this week, and 55-year-old man, never worked in his life, not particularly problematic in terms of his health or anything like that, but he had actually started signing on in September. He signed on for 3 months. He was then sanctioned on the 12th of December. The sanction went through, a 3-month sanction, went through to the 18th of March, after which his claim was disallowed. That meant it was shut down. And that meant that he could not get hardship allowance, he could not get housing benefit. His housing benefit was stopped for a period of a week. When he went back and signed on, the first day that he signed on, he was sanctioned again. That sanction took him through to June. And this is the situation he's in. He's actually living, a 55-year-old man, on £47 a week, apart from obviously that period of disallowance where he was living on absolutely nothing, and then he got behind in his rent, so his landlord is actually now on his back. Now, according to the government, sanctions is the last resort. Esther McVeigh says that it's a tiny proportion. You hear this for the brew all the time, but it's only a tiny proportion of people that are sanctioned at any given point in time. But the true scale and extent of sanctions is much, much wider than that. Because what they are talking about when they say a tiny proportion, they're talking about on a weekly and a monthly basis. But if you actually add these sanctions up over the period of a year, then it's a truly enormous total.
Do we have actual number? Do we know?
Yeah, just got them here. The true total of JSA and ESA, that's employment support allowance, that's people who need help in work, might have health problems and stuff. Sanctions before reconsiderations and appeals in the year to June 2014. We'll have to use backdated statistics because the DWP are not very forthcoming at actually coming up with up-to-date statistics. Was an estimated 1,030,000. So in the year to June 2014, 1,030,000 people were actually sanctioned. The committee's previous report used statistics to June 2013. The further used data shows a further rise in GA sanctions before reconsiderations of appeals, and appeals from about 6% of claimants per month to about 7%, and after reconsideration appeals from about 5% to 6%, that's per month. These are by far the highest rates since GSA was introduced in 1996. The monthly rate of GSA sanctions has stabilised, while the total number has started to fall, reflecting the fall in claimant count. Of course, we're hearing from the Tories all the time. There's more people working now than ever before, more people are off benefits than ever before, and this is an absolute lie. This is an issue of statistics and damn lies, they're absolutely lying through their teeth. They're manipulating the statistics to get the outcome that they actually want. Under the coalition, the main reason for GSA sanction has been not actively seeking work, followed by failure to participate in the work programme. By June 2014, the work programme had produced 312,780 GSA job outcomes and 545,873 GSA sanctions. So you're much more likely to actually face a sanction when you're actually within the regime than you are actually to find a job. Young people aged 18 to 24 incur GSA sanctions at twice the rate of other groups. Risk declines with age. Men are almost 50% more likely to be sanctioned than women. Ethnic minorities are at higher risk of sanctions, and disabled GSA claimants at higher risk of repeat sanctions. The framework for disability monitoring is inadequate, that's to say the least. The rate of sanctions for ESA claimants with mental and behavioural conditions is 1/3 higher than for those with other conditions. So, the more vulnerable you are, the younger you are, the more likely you are to actually be sanctioned. Homeless people are also at greater risk, although there are no relevant statistics. This is because they lack a stable address and their situation makes them less able to cope. DWP claim that sanctions are only used for a tiny minority who don't follow the rules. That's Esther McVeigh. The Employment Minister, Esther McVeigh, further claimed that the vast majority of people don't get sanctions. In fact, 1/5, 19% of GSA claimants were sanctioned in the 5 years 2008 to 2012. This is an underestimate, as it does not include sanctions overturned on reconsideration and appeal, and the proportion will be higher now, probably around a quarter. So 1 in 4 people have been sanctioned as a direct result of, over the last 5 years, according to David Webster. All the following are underestimates as already explained. During the new regime, from 22nd of October 2012 to 30th of June 2014, the average number of sanctions per sanctioned individual was 1.73. From April 2000 to 2014 of June, the average was 2.04. 500,000 people, 41.1%, received 2 sanctions, and 21.5% more than 2. There were 46,328 people who received 10 or more sanctions, on average 13.2 each. Esther McVeigh claimed, the people who get sanctions are willfully rejecting support for no good reason. After examining the relevant research, the Scottish Government concluded, research shows that claimants who face sanction are often unable to comply with conditions rather than unwilling. And this fundamentally totally marries with our experience at Dundee SUWM, because the people who are actually being sanctioned are those with literacy problems, those with mental health problems, those suffering from the results of drug abuse and substance abuse and alcohol abuse, and those with literacy problems. And those with literacy problems within Scotland today is estimated 25% of people. And one of the most eye-opening experiences I've had as a result of my experiences outside the Brew is coming across a much larger proportion of people who have literacy problems than I ever dreamed possible in the country that was probably the most literate society at the end of the 18th century. But today, we have a fundamental time bomb ticking away, and it's actually impacting upon some of the most vulnerable people within society. And the reason why they're being sanctioned is because very often the conditions that they have to comply with, the way in which they have to fill in their workbooks, the way that they actually have to follow job inquiries through computerised universal job match system, means that people, particularly older workers who are maybe just on the brew after a lifetime of work, digging holes. One guy I spoke to, he says, look mate, I'm illiterate. My wife, 59-year-old, in Arbroath. My wife, I was filled in my forms for me. She died, I'm on my own now, and I'm absolutely bereft. He said, I used to work for the local authority. My job was to dig one hole in one place and then fill another hole in another place. And he says, now they've got me on universal job match, I'm sanctioned. The man, you know, hadn't been able to have a bath or anything for a period of time because he had no money in his electricity, in his meter. And this is situations that we come across on a regular basis. I would say the people that are most at risk as a result of sanctions tends to be older men, because they didn't have, despite what David Webster said, they didn't tend to have the social support networks that women have. In the most eye-watering cases, and I've been reduced to tears over some of the cases that I've actually had to deal with, have been older men who just basically are in their houses without electricity, without light, you know, and this was during the period of the winter. During the period of the winter, we were outside at Wellgate Brew 2-3 times a week, as well as being at places like Blairgowrie, Perth, Arbroath, and other places as well. And some of the cases that we came across would mark your hair. You know, it just brought your hair. It really will. And how this is allowed to continue, I just do not know. Now, the thing about it is, what we were told was that, you know, the sanction regime had to happen. And in the 6 months prior to the Tories coming to power, compared with the 6 months after the Tories came to power, there was something like a tenfold increase in sanctions. A huge increase in sanctions of people right after the Tories came to power. And what we were being told was that everybody's in it together, everybody has to pay to help get rid of the deficit and our debts, and that meant that we're going to have to make substantial savings in areas like welfare. Well, with regards to the sanctions regime, over the last 2 years, the sanctions regime has actually led, according to government figures, to savings of £312 million. £312 million. Now you've got to set that against the welfare bill with regards to unemployment and unemployment related benefits, which is £4.5 billion in total. Now compare that, for instance, with the housing benefit bill. £4.5 billion for unemployment. The housing benefit bill alone is £24 billion a year. Compare it with pensions. The pensions bill is £94 billion a year. So this is the point, that in actual fact, unemployment benefit compared with the entire welfare bill is a tiny, tiny part. Now the savings that they made with regards to this £312 million by making people's lives a misery and pushing them beyond the edge often has to be balanced against the fact that there's been a £3.5 billion increase in housing benefit payments over the last year alone as a result of the impact of rising house prices, which then pushes up rents in the private sector, which means that everybody is actually paying much, much more to subsidise fundamentally rat-renting landlords. Now compare that increase with the savings that's actually made with regards to welfare reforms, and ask yourself, is that worth it? Is the savings that we're actually making in welfare actually proportionate to the impact that it's actually having on people's ability to actually live their lives in any kind of normal way whatsoever? Now, I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll make this just a couple of points with regards to the work that we've actually done in Dundee. Now, we've been working outside Dundee Job Centre, so as I say, since last December. We really started the work around about this time last year, actually, you know, on a systematic basis. We started off, it was myself, and I was working with another group of people, but they weren't so interested really in doing advocacy work. They were more interested in protests, and my argument was, no, we get inside the brew and we get all over them like a rash. You know, we start actually representing people and making ourselves relevant to the people that were attempting to try and convince to vote yes at that time, at the time of the referendum campaign. And we've conducted literally hundreds and hundreds of cases since that time. And from around about December, what we started noticing was a distinct decline in sanctions. We had basically been all over the DWP and Dundee like a rash. And what we were saying, and what we were pushing, was that Dundee was sanctions city. The sanctions rate in Dundee was higher than anywhere else in Scotland. No other job centre had a higher rate of sanctions. And what we believe is that from December, we now know this is actually the case, there was a dramatic change of strategy at Dundee DWP. And the way that we actually had that confirmed was we actually approached the food banks. And the food banks, Trussell Trust, and taught by Mohammed, who we work very closely with, referring people on when we come across desperate cases outside the brew, confirmed to us about a month ago that there had been a dramatic decline in referrals as a direct result of sanctions in Dundee from around the beginning of December onwards, which tallied fundamentally with our own experience. Now, do we claim the credit for that? You're bloody right we claim the credit for it. Damn right we do. You know? And we have been responsible for that decline in sanctions. But we don't let it rest on our laurels. What we've noticed over the last 2 or 3 weeks is a further upturn in both the sanctioning rate, not at the same levels as it was before Christmas, but still increasing, and also many other problems besides. Particularly, a particular problem that we're coming across at the moment is people being kicked off at ESA, Employment Support Allowance. This is people who have health problems. They go along to what is known as a work capability assessment, and the work capability assessments are actually getting turned down. Now, what impact does it have when a person who has multiple health problems, in some cases, degenerative conditions, conditions which are actually going to lead to the ending of their lives, such as cancer and other kinds of conditions, what actually happens? What kind of frame of mind are they put into when fundamentally the rug is taken from under their feet when they fail a work capability assessment? Here's a case here. Salvation Army. He's working, living in the Salvation Army. He's 42 years old. But he's had 10 suicide attempts in the last 3 years. He recently attended a work capability assessment, and next week he was due to attend another one. He split up with his wife, and he was not getting access to his child. And his work capability assessment is to find out whether he'd actually go on PIP. When I met him, he actually had 2 bandages around his wrists, and he'd recently attempted to commit suicide. I met him today. The next person that I discussed with, that come up to me, was a woman in her late 20s, who was an ex-heroin addict, who was suicidal, had failed her work capability assessment, had went then into a spiral of depression, had attempted her own life in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and my advice to her was to get a medical script from her doctor, because she was wanting to go back onto GSA to claim as an able-bodied person. She went to when they told her that she had to claim for GSA, she said, "Be lying, because I'm not able-bodied, I'm not able to work." So we actually basically, with these 2 individuals, along with other individuals, we were actually able to refer them on to welfare rights. We have a green, amber and red light system, and these 2 people were obviously red light cases that we actually refer on to welfare rights and refer on to the social work department. Now this is 2 suicide risks that we came across today within 5 minutes of one another. Over the last 2 weeks, we've came across a further 2 suicide risks in Dundee. And I'll finish with this. This is actually a report that I put up 2 weeks ago on the SUWN page. And this refers to a heart-rending case, in actual fact. And a case that doesn't, these kind of cases didn't stop me from getting angry ever. You know, if you need any kind of justification for seeing how rotten and corrupt the Westminster system is, look at the way that they actually treat the poorest and most vulnerable. It's the beating heart you know, it was the beating heart of the referendum campaign, of our justification for having, you know, independence, and it remains the case. We have to grasp welfare out of the hands of the Westminster elites, because these people are heartless. They should be allowed nowhere near our poorest and most vulnerable people within this country. And I'll just finish on this. On Thursday, we were approached at the Dundee SUWN stall by Steve, who was clearly distraught and angry. He told us that he had returned to the family home at the weekend to find his brother Colin in the middle of a suicide attempt by swallowing large numbers of paracetamol tablets. Colin had only recently been officially informed that following the issuing of a mandatory reconsideration, that his claim for ESA had been turned down. The decision was, however, very hurriedly reversed when it was revealed that Darren, another brother of Steve's, had committed suicide 2 years ago. Darren had suffered from schizophrenia, was re-diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a lesser condition. His money was cut, his condition worsened, and shortly afterwards he took his own life. The decision to reverse Colin's ESA decision was taken, according to Steve, because the DWP, and this is a direct quote from him, didn't want two people in the same family having committed suicide for the same reason. The official reason given for the change was different, but no less damning. Colin had had a heart attack 5 years ago, and he also suffers from angina and sleep apnea. But the stress of dealing with the mounting pressure the DWP had heaped on him led to a further diagnosis of severe depression, and he was granted ESA on the basis that he now suffered from a new condition. Colin's case has now come to the attention of the social work department, and he's also been treated by a psychiatrist. Steve himself had also recently been sanctioned by the DWP for failing to log in his computerised universal job match account. Not only was Steve unfamiliar with the computerised system, which he did not like and only used because he'd been told that it was mandatory, he was also distracted and increasingly anxious by Colin's deteriorating physical and mental health. Steve now has a job and expressed his joy at being clear of a so-called welfare system that he himself described as sinister. Both brothers are trying to rebuild their lives following the trauma of their trials at the hands of the DWP. But this case illustrates that we are dealing with a government department that is following an inhuman policy, which is leading to widespread misery, stress, ill health, and even death for some of the most vulnerable who are caught within its web. The sooner this sinister system ends, the sooner we can begin reshaping our lives after the most vulnerable, rather than seeing them as soft touches in the drive to cut costs, or else as undeserving scroungers who can be treated as little more than the dirt under Ian Duncan Smith's shoes. So I'll leave it there and we can discuss.